You're listening to the Reds Podcast.
This is episode number 145. Dory Clark is here, and we're talking about how to stand out.
This is the Red Podcast. Real entrepreneur development. Make more money, work less, and live a life of freedom. No BS advice that really works. Here's your hosts, David Hooper and Laurel Staples.
Right as soon as I picked up your book, I saw you discuss a term that I've kind of had mixed feelings about, and that's the term of thought leader. So I'd love you to discuss that term, what it means to you, and also why so many people have issues with it. I thought it was just me.
Yeah, no, it's true. A lot of people get a little bristly at the term thought leader. To a certain extent, it's with good reason, because oftentimes where we see it used is people who are calling themselves thought leaders, sometimes with absolutely no justification. You know, you have people that are sometimes a little bit underqualified, and you'll see on their Twitter handle, "Oh, I'm a thought leader in XYZ field." It's like, really? So I think that sometimes people assume that it's a term kind of used by blowhards, or consequently that it is, it's tied in with this sort of, celebrity thinker circuit, which can be a little bit distasteful. But I actually want to defend the term thought leader a little bit and argue that it is something that actually can be a noble thing and worth aspiring to. And the reason for that is that I actually really like the specificity of it, that, there's two parts to it. And if you parse it, thought leader, I mean, the first part is that it's someone who is recognized for their ideas. Thought has to be a part of it. So this can't be just a random celebrity or a reality TV person. It's somebody who is known for the ideas they contribute to the world. The second part, which is equally important, is leader. Which means they have to have followers. You can be the biggest expert in the world, you can be the smartest person in the world, but if you do not share your ideas with other people, and if you don't actually take the time to cultivate a community around your ideas, they're not doing anyone any good. You're not having the impact you need. So becoming a thought leader, to actually have your ideas make an impact, I think that's actually a worthy goal, and something that many professionals might want to aspire to.
Well, I'd like to make it a little bit personal on this interview and talk about your experience of becoming a thought leader. I thought you had an interesting story in the book about getting a Chamber of Commerce booking.
This was kind of a turning point for me, because I had started my consulting business. I've been doing it for about 9 years now, but I was in the early days of having a consulting business, and I had heard, as many people do, that, oh, you should try to get speaking engagements, and that way you can promote your business and people will know about you. Maybe you can attract some clients. And I thought, okay, I like speaking. I should try to do that. So I began reaching out to different chambers of commerce in the area, offering to speak for free. It was a pretty low bar, and I sent out these nice information packets and FedExed them. It was not a cheap thing. I put a DVD in there and a folder about myself. All the things that you're quote unquote supposed to do. And basically, what happened was I kept following up with this one particular chamber of commerce, and they kept pretending they hadn't received it. Oh no, we didn't get that. You have to send it again. And I kept doing it over and over again until I realized, oh, they're just lying to me. That's just what they tell people. And, so finally, the second or the third time, I pushed them on it. I'm like, really? Because I've sent this, twice now to you guys. You still haven't received it. And the truth came out. And they said, well, look, everyone wants to speak to our Chamber of Commerce. Why should we pick you? Every consultant wants to speak to us. I mean, frankly, when someone says that to you, it's pretty offensive, because I knew that I had talent to contribute. I knew that I had ideas to share that would be valuable and worthwhile. But it was actually a kind of important comeuppance for me, because I realized that even though I knew that, I was clearly not communicating that the proper way, because they didn't know that. They didn't care. They hadn't heard of me, and they didn't want to take the time to investigate it further. And so I realized that if I actually did want to have the impact that I wanted in the world, and if I wanted to have a successful business, I needed to do a better job of getting noticed and getting my ideas noticed. And so that's really what began me on the path of trying to create content, to get better known, and to find ways to stand out.
You talk a lot about breakthrough ideas. Does a breakthrough idea have to be that different? What makes a breakthrough idea?
So in a lot of ways, when I talk about breakthrough ideas, it's really about what you're known for. And, sometimes things really are a breakthrough. You can have a scientific breakthrough or something like that. But for the vast majority of people, that's not going to be the case. I mean, certainly if you're operating in the world of business, it's fairly rare that there's going to be, some idea that has never been heard before. But that doesn't mean that it can't be new, and it doesn't mean that it can't be something that really becomes intimately associated with you. So, for instance, yesterday I was doing a podcast interview with a gentleman named John Jantz, who is best known for his book Duct Tape Marketing and his sequel Duct Tape Selling. He's been writing a blog and doing a podcast for a long time about this. And really what he is best known for is creating a system for small businesses to follow to make their marketing easier and more strategic. These are ideas that other people have certainly talked about. It's not like a proprietary formula that he's advising people to do something in marketing that literally no one else says, but he's put it together in a new way and in a clear package that makes sense. And because people are able to hear it and apprehend it in a different way, that's created his brand. That's given him a business that has made him a lot of money over the years. Because even though it might not be quote unquote new in every way, it's a contribution. And that's his breakthrough idea. He's the duct tape marketing guy, and people seek him out for that. And they can do that for any of your listeners. I strongly believe they can find the unique thing that they are known for.
Coming from the music business, music publishing specifically, we see a lot of songs come through about love. When you think about it, how many songs you hear on the radio, most of them are about love. And we have a saying, we say, a new song on an old guitar. You need to say it in a different way, but the old guitar element is the experience that you have. You need to go out and live a little bit. I saw a TEDx talk that you did, and you talk about the importance of sustained reflection. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's really true, David. There's a gentleman who I interviewed in the book Stand Out named David Allen, who some of your listeners may have heard of. He is the creator of a very popular system for productivity called Getting Things Done. A quote that he told me, which I include in the book, is, "You don't need time to have a good idea. You need space." And I think that was really important, because ultimately, it's your breakthrough idea, the thing you land on, the perfect chorus for a song, whatever it is, you can do that in 30 seconds. But the problem is that for too many of us, our brains are run ragged by technology, by stress, by the inbox, by just thoughts pinging around, and we don't have the space to allow our minds to wander and to hit upon the solution that might take 30 seconds to come up with, but it requires this kind of expansive thinking that is too rare in this urgency-driven society. And so finding ways to carve that out, sometimes forcefully into your schedule, saying, no, I'm going to turn the smartphone off during dinner, or saying, I am going to take a half an hour walk after lunch, and that's what I'm going to do. Those are the moments that can actually be the most productive when it comes to finding solutions to ideas that have been vexing you and getting the kind of perspective that you need to figure out what are the longer-term strategic decisions you need to make.
I love that, because so many times we see somebody who is successful, an author. Let's take you, for example. The book Stand Out, How to Find Your Breakthrough Idea and Build a Following Around It. How long did it take to actually write it?
The actual writing part isn't that bad. The first draft probably took a couple of months to write. If you factor in those multiple revisions that you do, if I took all that time together, I'd probably say four and a half months total.
But how long has it been since you were trying to get that gig at the Chamber of Commerce?
Yeah,
that's years.
That's been a decade, absolutely.
So it really, when you think about it, this is a book that took at least a decade to write.
Yes. Yeah, it's two totally different time frames. That's exactly right.
So once you have your idea, breakthrough or not, a message that you want to share, how do you go about building a following?
So what I discovered in the course of researching Standout, over the course of this period of time, I actually interviewed about 50 top thought leaders in a variety of fields to figure out their experience and see what I could glean from it that regular professionals could apply in their own lives. And I discovered that when it comes to spreading ideas, there's really a 3-step process that everybody follows if they're going to be successful. Basically, the short way that I explain it is it starts with building a network, then it goes to building an audience, and finally it becomes building a community. And what I mean by that is building a network is about this one-to-one idea transmission. If you're going to really start something, you need, first of all, to have a group of trusted colleagues that you can bounce ideas around with. They can provide early feedback. They can tell you honestly if your idea sucks, and you trust them enough to know that they have your best interests at heart. That's a really important step. Next is building an audience, which means beginning to share your work with others. This is playing at the open mic nights. This is writing a blog post and sharing those initial thoughts. This is being willing to get up and give a speech so that other people can hear what you're thinking. And so you give like-minded people an opportunity to find you. And finally, the final step when it comes to an idea really taking off and catching fire is you stop being the only one who's talking about it. Your idea begins to spread because other people find it so useful or so interesting or so relevant to their own lives, they begin talking about it, and that community spreads it for you.
Yeah, being a marketing guy, that's how we know when things are taking off. If after a blog post or maybe these days in a Facebook group or Twitter, you can see people communicating about what you're doing amongst themselves, and they're not responding to you and your blog post, for example, but they're responding to each other.
Yes, exactly.
What about for those that find it scary to share ideas? Maybe the idea goes against their upbringing or current friends or community. Maybe it goes with it, but it's still scary to share. Do you have thoughts on that? How did you overcome that, or did you not experience that at all?
It's certainly a concern because some people feel really apprehensive about sharing their ideas with the world. And I think part of it is, in terms of overcoming it, is about how to reframe it. Many people in our culture and in other cultures are brought up to be really hesitant about self-promotion. They feel like, oh no, this is a terrible thing. You're bragging about yourself. And so, sharing any idea or, sharing what you're working on could be viewed as talking about yourself too much. And I think that it's really important, and this is a topic that I discuss in my first book, Reinventing You. It's really important for people to realize that's actually the wrong frame. It's an outdated frame because self-promotion does not have to be bragging. And in fact, talking about your ideas doesn't even have to be self-promotion. If you make it about your idea rather than about self-aggrandizement, you are serving a cause that's larger than you. And, one example that I like to mention is, something like Lean In, which has become obviously a huge cultural phenomenon, best-selling book. But you could very easily have seen a situation where Sheryl Sandberg, as a prominent executive, writes a book. It's a vanity project. And when she goes to talk about it on television or whatever, it's just, oh, buy my book. Here, I'm so great. I work at Facebook and I'm a billionaire. If that was the message dies there. No one else is interested. But because she made the message about Lean In about other people, about women stepping up and taking control of their lives and taking control of their professional world, people got interested enough that it became a movement. People created Lean In circles. There's a Lean In foundation, and the message spreads. And that is, it might feel scary to do it, but if your idea is about more than just you, then it actually is doing the world a disservice to keep it to yourself. The new frame is that it is your responsibility. If you want to be a good citizen, if you want to do what you're put on earth to do, you need to share those ideas if they can benefit other people.
You know who does this the best, and it's a very juvenile message in a lot of ways? Jimmy Buffett. When you go to a Jimmy Buffett show, they're the big jumbotrons, and Jimmy is never on them. It's always the fans. They bring their own sand. They have their own community, like you just talked about. They call themselves parrot heads. They have their own culture, their language. It's really all about them and the lifestyle. He's just the background noise. And I think looking at an entertainer such as Jimmy Buffett, but it works for thought leaders, as we're talking about. I'm going to lead into this. You talk about innovation coming from the edges. Looking at other industries and seeing how they're doing it and spreading their message, you can also take that into your industry to spread your message.
That's exactly right. And I love that example because it's so true. I mean, people go to a concert, certainly they like the performer, they like the music. That's what got them interested in the beginning. But nobody needs to go to a Jimmy Buffett concert 100 times. Nobody needs to go to a Grateful Dead concert, in the past 100 times. They go because it becomes a community. It becomes about the friends they meet, the overall experience. The musician might be the vehicle, but it's not just about that. It's about the entire experience and the ecosystem that has built up around them.
Let's talk about innovation coming from the edges and coming from other industries. You've got some great examples of that. What are some of your favorite ones?
Yeah, one of the examples in the book that I thought was particularly fascinating, this guy was actually a former consulting client of mine, and I profile him in the book. His name is Eric Schott, and he is a scientist at the Icahn Center for Genomics and Multiscale Biology at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. He is one of the leading practitioners of biology today. He has been profiled not once but twice in Esquire alone. It's been written about in the New York Times, just about everywhere else. He's led to tons of very interesting scientific breakthroughs on everything from Alzheimer's to diabetes. And what's most fascinating is that even though he is this bigwig in biology now, he didn't actually start out as a biologist. His initial training was math and computer science, and he later switched over to biology. So as a result of this early training in a different discipline, he was one of the early adopters of big data in science. And biologists historically were not trained that way. They were trained in this kind of old school model of, okay, we're going to study one gene, we're going to have a hypothesis, we're going to test the hypothesis, then we're going to move on to the next gene. And that's great up to a point, but it will take you a really long time to figure out the human body if you're doing that. When big data became possible based on technological advances in the 1990s, Eric was at the forefront because he was actually one of the few people, because of his quantitative training, who understood it. And he jumped on it and said, guys, we should be doing this. And a lot of people were very resistant because it was not how biology had historically been done. But he pushed it. He got a lot of pushback. He was not a popular man in the world of biology for a very long time. But today, his view has largely prevailed, and he's been able to publish more than 200 peer-reviewed scientific papers and really move the discipline forward. And I think for anyone, we can take a lesson from it, that it is rare for innovation to come from the center of a field. It most often comes from the edges because people who have training in different disciplines or people who have different viewpoints can often see things that other people can't. They can often say, well, wait, they do this over here. Why aren't we doing this over there? And it's in asking those questions that you can actually get some really interesting new results.
Yeah, Philo Farnsworth, I don't know if you know that name, but just a farmer and invented the television.
Yes, absolutely.
Just a farmer. And when you think about things like that, Henry Ford, everybody knows him for the assembly line. He didn't invent it, though, just happened to be in a pork processing plant, saw how pork was being done, and thought, well, let's make cars that way. So
right.
I love that. And I love that a lot of times we were talking about the 10 years before this book came out, and there were years before that are all being added into your briefcase, I guess we'll call it, full of knowledge that you have that enable you to do what it is that you do now. With that said, I want to jump into something you mentioned just a minute ago, your first book, talking about reinvention. Do you have advice for somebody who has been in a business, been in a career, but is thinking of changing? How do you go about that? And when do you know if you're ready to do it?
It can be a scary process for a lot of people because, in particular, the longer you've put in, the more years in a given job or a given industry, sometimes people are really afraid that they are going to give up that seniority. And, they say, well, I can't afford to start at the bottom again. And so they feel trapped in a field that they may have grown tired with or frustrated by, or, maybe their advancement opportunities have capped out. And, that's a really tough situation, but it's one that absolutely can be surmounted. And so as I discuss in Reinventing You, how do you know if it's time to make a reinvention? I mean, sometimes, of course, people are forced into it. Personally, I started my career early on as a journalist, and I got laid off early on. I couldn't get another job as a journalist because the industry was collapsing, and so I had to reinvent myself. Some people have that. But for people where it's a little bit more of an ambiguous situation, I would say the first thing to look at is, look at your gut. Do you want to go to work on Monday morning? I mean, we all wake up and we're sleepy on Monday morning, but do you really dread going to work? Literally, a lot of scientific studies have shown that the most common time for heart attacks is Monday morning. It is almost without a doubt because people have so much stress and agitas about the idea of going back to work to a place they don't want to do that. So I think that you need to really look inside yourself to say, how do you feel about it? You may also say, do you feel like you're in a rut? Do you feel like you could do this job in your sleep? Do you feel like you're not growing anymore? Those are important questions to ask. Once you decide, all right, I do want to reinvent myself, how do you do it? It is basically a 3-step process that I lay out in Reinventing You. Very briefly, the first one is figuring out what your current brand is now. What do people think is most distinctive about you? And where do you really excel? What seems unique about you? Because those are strengths that you can build on. It's very hard to know this about ourselves. It's hard to have that distance to enable us to do this. So there's exercises that we can do to figure out what our brand is and how it's perceived by others. The second step, once you've done that, is creating a proactive vision of where you want to be. This is really figuring out how you want to be seen by others and where you want to go and crafting the steps that will enable you to get there, creating that roadmap. And the third and final thing is what I call living out your brand. Because some people think when they say, oh, what's your brand? They think that is the equivalent of your elevator pitch. Your brand is what you say about yourself. And that's true, but that is really only the tip of the iceberg. That is the smallest part. Your brand is not just what you say about yourself, but it is also how you dress. It's who you hang out with. It is what people find about you in a Google search. It is what professional associations you're involved in. It is what kind of content you create in the world. So it's about really aligning everything you do to support your new brand in the direction that you're moving into. So broadly speaking, those are the steps that I advise people to follow in a reinvention.
Well, your new brand, not so new anymore, I guess at this point, author and speaker, you've got an interesting story about how your book deal came about that I think has great lessons for people who maybe feel like they're kind of maybe wasting time by doing their own thing or following passions. And I love your story of how you got your book deal.
Yeah, the book deal, I had been wanting a book deal for a really long time. I mean, ever since I was a kid, really, I wanted to write a book. But in 2009, I got very serious about wanting to try to get a book contract. I wrote 3 book proposals in the first half of that year. Just figuring, well, one of them's going to work, one of them's going to be appealing. But that was the wrong strategy. That was kind of a waste of time because they all came back to me. And, the book proposals were probably fine enough. The problem, the publisher said, was that I wasn't famous enough. And so they didn't want to publish my book because really, these days, mainstream publishers only want to publish you if they feel pretty set that you have a huge base and can sell a lot of copies without them having to do much work. And so I realized I was very frustrated, but I realized, okay, this is going to have to be a slower process than I had hoped. I'm going to have to go back to the drawing board, and I'm going to have to get more famous in order to write a book. And so I realized that what I probably needed to do was start blogging. And so I started blogging first for the Huffington Post. And then, I was fishing around trying to find another venue to write for, but not having any luck. I would send out pitches. I would try to get friends to introduce me to their editors at different publications, but nothing was really shaking out. And in the midst of all of this, I ended up selling my bicycle on Craigslist. The person that I sold it to, I didn't know anything about her, but she, quite rightly, she had Googled me to make sure I was a legitimate person and a legitimate bicycle seller. And she saw the work that I did. And as we were transacting the sale, she said to me, "Oh, I see you're a consultant. I work for the Harvard Business Review." And I said, "Fantastic." And I saw my opportunity and I said, you guys have a blog, right? How do people get to blog for you? And I had to follow up a few times, but she was ultimately nice enough to introduce me to an editor there who I started working with. And I wrote a blog post for them. And in fact, the second post that I ever wrote for them became my book. The post was popular. They asked me to turn it into a magazine piece for the Harvard Business Review magazine. That was well received. And as a result of that, I had several different literary agents approach me and ask if I was represented and if I was interested in turning it into a book. So I decided to go for it, and that really jump-started my career as an author.
It's that easy.
That's right.
The new book is called Stand Out, How to Find Your Breakthrough Idea and Build a Following Around It. Available everywhere. And Dory, is there anything, before we wrap up, that I didn't ask you that I should have, a message that you want to get out?
Thank you, David. Just one thing that I'll mention for your listeners who are interested in this topic about how to find your breakthrough idea and build a following around it is that I actually have a free giveaway on my website, which is doryclark.com, DORIECLARK. It is a 42-page free workbook that I adapted from Stand Out. It's called 139 Questions to Find Your Breakthrough Idea, and that's exactly what it is. It's a workbook with all kinds of questions to get your mind pumping around this topic. So for folks who are interested, they can go onto my site, doryclark.com, and download that for free.
So if you don't have your breakthrough idea yet, never fear. Dory is going to take care of you after 139 questions. Dory, thanks so much for being here. The book is great. It's available everywhere books are sold. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. If they're selling books, they're selling yours.
Thank you so much, David.
You've been listening to Red Podcast, Real Entrepreneur Development. Subscribe today using iTunes, Stitcher, or via RSS at redpodcast.com.